Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. Over the last couple of weeks, we have got two new 85mm f1.4 lenses that have released for Sony FE. Now, it may be a little bit longer than that before you see this particular video, but the Viltrox PRO AF is, I think, a lens that most of us expected to be good at this point. That says a lot about Viltrox's rising star and growing reputation, that when they release a new lens, most of us who review lenses expect it to be good. But the contender here is a complete unknown out of left field, and that is from filter company Kase. They have released their first lens, and it's actually a really good lens. The Kase AF 85mm f1.4 is a lens that actually brings some innovation to the segment, and for that reason, in particular, I gave it a very positive review. So today we're going to put these two lenses head to head. If you're looking at these two contenders and wondering which one is going to be a better fit for you, well, hopefully I'll be able to help you answer that question by comparing them side by side in a variety of different ways and examining how they play out for you. So we're going to talk about what's similar, some things that are different but not necessarily a pro for either one. Then we'll talk about some reasons to choose the Viltrox, reasons to choose the Kase, and then wrap it up in the end. Sound interesting? Well, let's dive in and let's find out. So what's similar between the two lenses? Well, they both have the same focal length and maximum aperture combination, 85mm and f1.4. They both have a fairly similar feature set, the ability to declick the aperture, an AF/MF switch, a function button, at least one, in another case actually two. They have a similar degree of build quality, similar type materials. They both feel like well-made lenses. They both offer weather sealing. In the case of the Viltrox, I actually have a breakdown. There are 10 seals inside. I don't have the number inside, but it does have weather sealing beyond just at the gasket at the rear lens mount, and so I think that it has probably a similar degree of weather sealing. Overall, as we're going to see, their autofocus speed is close between the two lenses, and we'll try to parse that out a little bit more, but not terribly different between the two. We'll also see that they have a similar performance when it comes to something like aperture rack. If you declick the aperture and you rack through the aperture, you can see here first with the Viltrox, you're able to smoothly rack through the various aperture settings without any kind of pulsing or preset positions along the way. You can do the same thing with the Kase, however, and so you can move smoothly throughout the aperture range while doing aperture racking. So let's talk about a few things that are different, but not necessarily a pro or con for either one. Although the Kase is the smaller lens, it actually frames a little bit tighter than what the Viltrox does. And so in doing head-to-head tests, I definitely noticed a difference in how tight the framing was. Now, there's always a tolerance with all of these lenses. It's within a couple of millimeters, but there is a variance between the two. Also on the Viltrox, it has floating elements, and so some people are put off when they feel things moving around when the lens is just loose like this. However, that is a purposeful design that allows it to perform more consistently throughout the focus range all the way up to close focus. And so that does come with a little bit of advantage that we'll detail in our breakdown. Now, there's also a neutral difference when it comes to the front filter thread. The Kase uses a 72mm front filter thread, while the Viltrox uses a 77mm front filter thread. Both of those are fairly common, and frankly, there's not really much of a price difference between filters in either one of those sizes. Not enough for me to really consider it an advantage for one or the other. So how about some reasons to choose this new Kase lens? Well, first of all, as you can see, it is significantly smaller. It is 82mm in diameter by 99mm in length, whereas the Viltrox is 84.3mm in diameter, but more importantly, it is 108.5mm in length. And so about 10mm longer, that's enough to definitely make a difference. The Kase is also significantly lighter. It weighs in at just 580 grams versus the fairly hefty 800 grams for the Viltrox. The Viltrox is a little bit of a tank of a lens, and so certainly it carries some heavier weight, and that could be a factor for you. The Kase brings some really interesting innovation when it comes to filter integration. And if you haven't watched my review on this lens, I recommend that you take a look. If you're interested at all in filtering, this lens is designed with a built-in magnetic inlay ring here, which will allow you to just magnetically attach filters and even to attach filters and be able to rotate them. So it's a really smart implementation when it comes to using those filters. It also is designed, or at least Kase designs filters that are able to drop in to your you're in front of, between the lens and the Sony sensor, though to be fair, those filters could work with other lenses, not just this particular lens. But definitely that filter integration is a really cool feature and certainly worthy of consideration. If you're someone that likes to use filters, particularly something like maybe variable ND filters as a part of your video workflow, this is a really cool application for that. This lens also has, the Kase lens also has a little bit less fringing than what the Viltrox does. It's not to say that the Viltrox is bad, but in some situations, as you can see here on the front of my SLR, you can see that there's definitely some fringing that shows up for the Viltrox that is not present there on the Kase. The Kase, even though it has that smaller front diameter, it actually is the one that has the less amount of vignette. It only requires a +31 for correction, which is really quite low for an 85 f1.4, whereas the Viltrox requires a +48. Not saying that that is bad at all. It's really, again, not bad for an 85mm lens. However, the Kase has less of it. Now also, as far as the feature set, the Kase adds a second function button here, and it's not just a redundant button, but rather it actually has a set purpose. And that set purpose is that by default, you can, when you click it, it'll take you right to minimum focus. And so if you're wanting to get the maximum level of magnification you can get, which we'll talk about that in just a moment, you can click to get there. But you can also preset another focus position. If you're wanting to instantly go back to another focus position, you can hold that down and it will set it into memory, and so that when you click that, it'll jump right to that position. And so an extra layer of functionality that the Viltrox doesn't have. And then the final point in the favor of the Kase is that it does have a higher degree of magnification. It's right up near the top of the class for an 85mm lens with a 0.14 times level of magnification. And as you can see, compared to the Viltrox lens, that is significantly higher. And so you are going to be able to get both closer to objects and also get a higher degree of magnification. So there are certainly some reasons to choose the Kase lens here. How about some reasons to choose the Viltrox? Well, the first and obvious one is going to be price. The Viltrox MSRP is $598, though by using the code in the description down below, you can save a bit more off of that and drop that price even further into the $560 range or so. The Kase comes to market with an MSRP of $738 US. And so by the time you get the discount from the Viltrox, there's about a $180 difference. That's significant. And so that might be a, kind of a deal maker or a deal breaker for you. The Viltrox also exhibits better contrast, and I noticed that not just on my test chart, but also in some real-world comparisons. Shooting head-to-head, there's just a little bit more pop. And so if you're more about the pop and high contrast in your lenses, the Viltrox does a little bit better job there. I also found that when it comes to the specular highlights, and I don't know if it's kind of case specific here, whereas the Kase has the higher number of aperture blades, as you close that aperture down, you notice that the blades don't close completely evenly. And so what that means is in the specular highlights is that they're just a little bit lopsided, whereas the Viltrox offers more consistently round specular highlights. And so I appreciated that. It also exhibits, I think, a more neutral color rendition. And I think that the Kase has maybe it just skews very slightly warmer in its overall tone, whereas the Viltrox lens delivers a more neutral color profile. And so you may actually visually prefer one or the other, and so that may or may not be a positive for you. But as you can see in these comparisons and in the optical breakdown to come, they definitely do render a little bit different. I also found when it comes to the autofocus side of things that while Still's autofocus speed is roughly similar, I did notice that for video, autofocus pulls were a little bit more confident on the Viltrox lens, a little bit more consistent, moving with a little more speed and also a little bit more confidence there. It's a minor difference, but the Viltrox does exhibit a little less vignette. Both of them are not bad, but the Viltrox is a -2, so a tiny bit of pincushion distortion, and the Kase lens has it's a -4 to correct, so just a little bit more of that pincushion distortion. I also felt that even beyond the specular highlights, that the bokeh rendering in a number of situations was just a little bit smoother from the Viltrox lens. That's particularly true as you get close to the edges. And close to the edges, it's a little better engineered out to the corners, and so the bokeh remains smooth even towards the edge of the frame. And then finally, one final vote in favor of the Viltrox is that it is consistently sharper. Not by a big margin, but particularly as you stop the lenses down and in the corners, the Viltrox will sharpen up to outstanding levels, whereas the Kase never quite does. And even wide open, there's different points of variance throughout the frame, as is often the case, but the Viltrox is just consistently better at the various tested apertures that I looked at. And so I would say in general, it is the sharper lens, though both of these frankly are very nice and sharp. So my conclusion is this: the Kase is a surprisingly strong contender for a first go. In many ways, the feature set and the overall feel of the lens, it actually reminds me a lot of a Sigma lens, which is a positive thing. It is a strong contender, particularly if you want the smaller size. And if you're interested in filtering, there is a few more feature options, particularly when it comes to filtering with the Kase lens as compared to the Viltrox. The Viltrox lens wins in the areas where Viltrox lenses often do win. It's very, very good optically, probably a little bit better than the Kase optically in general, and it's also cheaper. And nobody is doing the combination of price and performance like Viltrox is doing at this point. And so if you can handle a bigger size and more weight and you're in all about the optical performance, the Viltrox is an amazing performer for its price tag. And so hopefully that helps you to determine which of these lenses is going to be the more appealing option for you. Frankly, I don't think that either one of them is a bad choice. They just have strengths in slightly different areas. Now, if you want a deeper dive into the performance of either one of them, you can either check out my full text review of each of them, linked in the description down below. There's links in this video embedded to the video reviews of them, and also links in the description below. And if you want to stay tuned right now, let's jump into an optical comparison where you can take a little bit closer look at how they compare head to head in identical situations. Okay, let's start by taking a look at comparison of vignette and distortion. So you can see that the Viltrox wins a bit when it comes to distortion. That pincushion distortion is so mild that you really don't need to correct it. It's not bad on the Kase lens, but you can definitely see a little bit more of a sucking in here in the center. And so a -4 to correct here, and a -2 on the verge of a -1 here, so not bad at all. Vignette, however, you can see is a little bit more pronounced in the corners. For the Viltrox, it's around 50, whereas here I only needed to use about a +37 to correct for it. And so definitely a kind of a give and take here. Win on distortion front for Viltrox, a win on the vignette front for Kase. Now, when it comes to the fringing front, there's actually an element that I neglected to mention during the discussion of pros and cons for each lens. So I will go back over one of the pros for the Kase versus the Viltrox. You can see here when it comes to longitudinal style chromatic aberrations, it's really, really neutral in all of these shiny places, whereas you can see some of this blue-green fringing that is present on the Viltrox lens. Likewise, if we look at these specular highlights, you'd see that there's some fringing from the Viltrox there that is not present from the Kase lens. And on a positive note for the Kase, you can also see that inside here it's really clean, not much in terms of inner lining, not a lot of stuff inside the specular highlights. So some good things for Kase on that front. Where the Viltrox has an advantage, however, is when it comes to lateral style chromatic aberrations near the edge of the frame. You can see that the Kase does suffer a bit from that, whereas the Viltrox is really, really nice and neutral, and so no problem for it on that front. Now, when it comes to resolution and contrast, this is on a 61 megapixel Sony A7R Mark V, and I'm showing you this at 200% magnification. So this is a torture test, but you can see that in the center of the frame, the Viltrox is a little bit better contrast and a little bit better detail. It's not a significant win in the center of the frame, but it's there a bit. As we move towards the mid-frame, you can also see there is a little bit of an advantage for the Viltrox that continues there. Just a little bit more contrast, a little bit more popping to this, maybe a hair more detail in some of those areas. If we go down into the corners, you can see that the Viltrox advantage is extended a bit further. It's a little bit better here in this corner. We pop over to this side, you can see it looks better here, and it looks better up in this corner as well. And so it's a more consistent performance on the edges as well. If we stop these lenses down, you can see that in the center of the frame that the Kase has made some good improvements. In the mid frame, you can see again, Kase has come up better. It's I don't know if it's quite as good as the Viltrox, but it is very, very close. And there's kind of some give and take here. If I look at this one, for example, it pops more from the Viltrox than it does from the Kase. The Kase looks nice here in the hair. I would say that this text here is nice and inky looking on the Kase lens. And so, like I said, there's some give and take. When you get to the corners, it's still a bit a more pronounced win for the Viltrox. It's definitely stronger as you move towards the edge of the frame. Both these lenses are extremely sharp already, however. As you stop on down to f5.6, you can see that the Viltrox, it just has a little bit extra in the tank. It gets a little bit stronger, though the Kase does look really good here in the mid frame. I particularly see it in the corners, however, where the Viltrox gets to truly excellent levels in the corner. The Kase never really matches those when it comes to corner performance, but in lots of places, they're both looking very good. I would say in the rule of thirds zone, the Kase is doing a really good job, which is arguably the most important. It's not doing a better job necessarily than the Viltrox, but close to being equally good. Now, we mentioned that the Kase has the better minimum focus distance and up close level of magnification. As you can see here, that is significantly different. When it comes to the actual resolution up close, the Viltrox is actually the winner. It has those floating elements. It allows it to do just a little bit of better job, even at f1.4, of giving you more detail. Now, contrast is still not exceptional, but if you stop the Viltrox down a little bit, it has more capacity for delivering fine details up close. Now, as mentioned previously, the framing is different between these two lenses. And so here, though the camera is set up on a tripod at equal distance, you can see that when I swap the lenses, the Kase actually frames tighter, the Viltrox frames looser. And it's actually quite a noticeable difference between the two. It's probably only boils down to 2 or 3 millimeters. The Viltrox could be a little bit short of 85 millimeters. The Kase could be a little bit longer than 85 millimeters. But in both cases, it can only be about 2 millimeters in each direction. There is tolerances that they have to stick to. And so what we can see here at f2.8 is that the specular highlights are bigger than on the Kase lens, but we can also see that the geometry continues to suffer. And as we stop it on down, you can actually see that the aperture is a little bit lopsided on the Kase, and so it never is quite as circular as what you're going to get from the Viltrox, which gives you more consistent roundness. And so, there's a pro if you're up close for the Kase, you're going to give you bigger and softer, but the Viltrox is going to give you better geometry. What follows will be just a series of quick comparisons where we take identical images and just evaluate a few different things in the frame. So here at f1.4, we can see that, yes, again, there's a higher level of magnification from the Kase. There's a little bit better detail and contrast from the Viltrox lens. It delivers more fine details. And then if we move beyond that and we look towards kind of defocus regions on this image, there's a difference in the color tone. I tend to prefer the color tone out of the Viltrox personally. I think it's just a little bit more accurate. But in general, it's, the bokeh rendering here is not radically different, as you can see here. So you look towards areas of defocus. I think that the Viltrox has very slightly less outlining, and so there's a little bit more edges that show up here. But in this image, it's not a huge difference. Now here at f2, we can just take a look at how things are comparing now. And so here, a composition that's closer to the edge of the frame. Viltrox is still just a little bit tighter, but you can see it's not a radical difference between the two. Looking towards like the specular highlights, here's again where the Kase wins in terms of being bigger and softer. When it comes to the actual rendering of areas, it's less of a difference because the Viltrox does a little bit better job of having like less outlining around things. And so I feel like the rendering of these specular areas here or defocused areas is just a little bit more organic looking than what I find from the Kase lens. I think that's more obvious maybe in this image, and you can see here the color difference. And so if we zoom in on the subject here, in this particular shot, I feel like I'm not sure that the point of focus is identical. It's close, but you can see that in this real world shot, definitely for whatever reason, you're definitely getting more pop in the detail from the Viltrox lens. You can also see the difference in color where the Kase looks a little bit warmer, but here we're really more looking at the bokeh. And so let's look at a few areas here. Here we have got some like raindrops or dew that is here on these grasses. And so you can see, again, there's just more outlining from the case where it looks a little bit bigger, or busier, I should say, in this transition zone. And I think it's just a little smoother looking from the Viltrox. As we go towards the edge of the frame in this zone here, again, I find that there's a little bit more edging that catches my eye, whereas this looks a little bit softer, a little better defocused. Here's a really complicated area with these pine needles. And again, I just find that this looks busier to my eye than what it does on the Viltrox. So I think in particular around the edges, the Viltrox has an advantage of, I think maybe it just does a better job off towards the edges of the frame. It's engineered a little bit better out there, whereas the Kase a little less so. And so as you can see, both of these tend to be very, very good lenses. And so hopefully the deep dive into the optics has helped you to determine which one is the better for you. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day and let the light in.